Open your banking app. Right now, before I say another word, look at the number sitting next to your name. That number is the sum of your life. Months of early alarms, of meetings you sat through, of things you swallowed and didn't say to people because you needed the paycheck. It's your safety, your plans, the thin wall between you and the moment everything goes wrong. And I want to ask you one simple thing about it, a thing you've maybe never once asked, not in your whole adult life. Where is it? Not which bank, not which app. Where physically is the money? Try to actually picture it. Most people, when they push on this, imagine a vault somewhere, a room with their share of it stacked and waiting, their name on a shelf. So let's follow that instinct and go look. You won't find it. There is no vault with your money in it. There is no stack of bills with your name on a shelf. No drawer, no box, no physical thing anywhere on earth that is your savings. What you have, what you actually have, is a record, a line in a database owned by your bank, a row that says they owe you this much. Your money is a sentence written in a ledger. That's it. That's the whole thing. And here's where it gets strange. If you and everyone else who banks there walked in tomorrow and asked for it, all of it in cash, the bank could not give it to you. Not because it's a scam, because the money you think is sitting there was never sitting there. Most of it doesn't exist in any form you could hold. It exists the way a promise exists. Hold that thought because it's the crack the whole rest of this runs through. We tell ourselves a quiet story about money, and the story is that it's real in a way other things aren't. Opinions are soft, feelings are soft, but money is hard. Money is the floor you stand on when everything else is uncertain. You can argue about love or politics, but 1,000 in your account is 1,000. Solid, countable, true. That solidity is the most comforting feeling in modern life. And it is the thing I'm going to spend the next hour taking apart, because it isn't true, and somewhere underneath you may already know it isn't. Let me put a number on the strangeness. Across the world's economies, the physical cash, the actual notes and coins, makes up only a small slice of all the money that supposedly exists. The overwhelming majority is digital, a number in a system, conjured and erased without anything physical ever moving. So when you look at your balance, you're not looking at a representation of cash sitting in reserve. You're looking at the thing itself. The number is the money. There is nothing behind it. The curtain is the show. I'll be honest with you about where I stand before we go further, because I don't want to pretend I'm a neutral camera. When I first really understood this, not the textbook version but the gut version, I didn't feel clever. I felt a little sick. Not because someone's cheating me, exactly, because of how completely I'd never noticed. I'd built an entire life on top of a thing I'd never once turned over to look at the underside of. And the more I looked, the less sure I got that anyone is in control of it the way I'd assumed someone must be. So here is the question this whole thing is built around, and I want you to carry it with you, because we're going to come back to it changed. If your money isn't a physical thing, and isn't backed by a physical thing, then what is holding it up? What makes the number mean anything at all? There are 3 answers, and we're going to walk into each one. The first is a broken promise, a specific night in 1971 when a man on television quietly cut a cord that had held for centuries, and almost nobody understood what they just watched. The second is a mechanism, the thing banks actually do when they hand you a loan, which is stranger than any conspiracy because it's printed openly in central bank documents, and almost no one reads them. And the third is the strangest of all, the real foundation, the thing every dollar and euro and yen is finally standing on. It isn't gold, it isn't government, it's you, it's all of us, agreeing every single day not to ask the question you just asked. Most of us will go a whole life without asking it. You just did. So let's go find out where the floor went. For most of human history, money had to be heavy. Think about why. If you and I are strangers and I hand you a coin for your grain, you have no reason to trust me and no reason to trust a flimsy token I could make 1,000 of in my basement. But gold is different. Gold is rare in a way you can't fake. You can't grow it, can't print it, can't conjure it on a Tuesday afternoon. Every gram that exists took the planet billions of years and a dying star to make. So when money was gold, its value didn't depend on trusting me at all. It sat in your palm with a weight that did the trusting for you. The heaviness was the whole point. The heaviness was the guarantee. But gold is a nightmare to actually use. Carry enough of it to buy a house, and you're a target on every road. So people did the obvious clever thing. They left the gold with someone trustworthy, a goldsmith, later a bank, and walked away with a paper note that said the bearer can collect this much gold on demand. The paper was light. The paper was the promise, and the promise was as good as the metal sitting in the vault behind it, because at any moment you could march in, slap the note on the counter, and walk out with the real thing. That's the part I need you to feel, because everything hinges on it. The paper in your pocket was never the money. It was a claim ticket, a coat check for gold. Worthless cotton and ink, except for one thing. Somewhere, your share of the metal was actually there, and the ticket meant you could go get it. This was the deal the entire modern world was built on, and it had a name: the gold standard. Your currency was pegged to a fixed amount of metal, and the government swore on its credibility that the peg was real. After the Second World War, they made it official and global. In 1944, delegates from 44 nations met in a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and built a system with the US dollar at its center. The American government promised to convert dollars to gold at a fixed price, $35 an ounce, and every other currency pinned itself to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold because the dollar was gold, once removed. A claim ticket on a vault in a place called Fort Knox. So now there were two promises stacked on top of each other. Your country promised its paper was worth gold, and the world promised the dollar was worth gold. Trust resting on trust. But at the very bottom, under all of it, something heavy. Something you could, in theory, walk in and demand. The floor was real. You could knock on it. Here's the catch nobody likes to say out loud. The whole arrangement only works if people, mostly, don't knock. If everyone showed up at once demanding their gold, there was never enough metal for all the tickets. There never is. A bank holds a little gold and issues a lot of paper, betting that on any given day, only a few people come collecting. The promise was always bigger than the vault. Always. From the very beginning, the system ran on the quiet assumption that you would trust the ticket and never actually cash it. For a while, that held. And then it started to crack, slowly, in a way almost no one noticed. Because America had discovered something intoxicating. It could print more dollars than it had gold to cover. More dollars for wars, for ambitions, for the cost of being the country that paid for everything. Every new dollar was another claim ticket on a vault that wasn't growing. The tickets multiplied, the gold didn't. And the arithmetic underneath the world's money quietly went upside down. More paper promising metal than there was metal to promise. Other countries weren't blind. They could see the same numbers we could. They could count the dollars piling up in their reserves. And they could count, roughly, how much gold sat in Fort Knox. And they could see the gap widening into a chasm. And a thought began to spread among the people who held those dollars. The most dangerous thought a financial system can ever face. What if we're not the only ones who noticed? What if everyone tries to cash their ticket at once? By the late 1960s, that thought stopped being abstract. Nations began lining up at the window, dollars in hand, asking America to make good on the promise. France sent a warship across the Atlantic to carry its gold home. The line was forming, the bluff was being called, and in August of 1971, a handful of men flew in secret to a retreat in the Maryland woods to decide what to do when the promise can no longer be kept. They decided to break it. August 13, 1971, 15 men disappear into Camp David, the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, and the people running it are told to say nothing to anyone. No press, no warning, not to allies, not to Congress, not to the other nations whose entire economies were about to change while they slept. Inside were Richard Nixon, his Treasury Secretary, John Connally, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Arthur Burns, and a young undersecretary named Paul Volcker, who would spend the rest of his life shaping the dollar. For 3 days, they argued over a problem that had no good answer. The world wanted gold America didn't have. The promise was about to be called in full, and there was not enough metal in Fort Knox to honor it. You can keep a promise, or you can keep your gold. You could not, that summer, do both. So they chose. On the evening of Sunday, August 15th, Nixon went on television and told the country he was protecting the dollar from, in his words, international speculators. He framed it as strength, as defense. He announced a freeze on wages and prices, a tax on imports, and buried in the middle of it, in language built to slide past you, the thing that actually mattered. He was suspending the dollar's convertibility into gold. Read that again in plain words. The window where you could bring dollars and walk out with metal, closed. The claim ticket, canceled. Every dollar on earth had been, in principle, a coat check for gold. And Nixon stood up and calmly announced there were no more coats. There never would be again. Take the ticket home. It buys what the next person will give you for it, and nothing more. The speech lasted about 15 minutes. He called the measure temporary. It was never once reversed. More than 50 years later, the window is still shut, and it is never, ever opening again. I want to sit in how quiet this was, because the quiet is the haunting part. There was no crash that night. The sun came up. People went to work Monday and bought coffee with the same bills, and the bills still worked, and almost no one watching that broadcast understood that the thing underneath their money had just been removed. The Washington Post journalist, William Grider, later marked that exact date as the moment America's old dominance of the world economy ended, and most Americans never felt the floor move. That's the thing about a foundation. You only notice it when you go looking, and nobody was looking. Here is the number that makes the weight of it land. From 1944 until that night, an ounce of gold was fixed at $35. Locked. A constant you could build a life on. Today, that same ounce runs into the thousands of dollars. The metal didn't change. Gold is exactly as gold as it was in 1944. The same element doing the same nothing it has always done. What changed is the dollar. It came unmoored, and it has been drifting downward against the real ever since, by more than 90% in purchasing power across these decades. The thing your grandparents thought of as solid as gold has lost almost everything it was once worth, measured against the gold it used to promise. And yet, here's where I have to be honest, because the easy version of this story is a lie, and I don't want to tell it to you. The easy version says Nixon stole the floor, that this was the crime, that we'd all be safer if a coin in our pocket still meant a sliver of metal in a fortress. But that's too simple, and the people who push it hardest are usually selling gold. The truth is messier. The gold standard had its own cruelty. It chained a country's whole economy to how much yellow metal it happened to dig up, which had nothing to do with how many people needed work or food. It made depressions deeper and recovery slower, because you couldn't respond to human need. You could only respond to the size of the hoard. Cutting that chain gave governments the power to actually steer, to soften crashes, to fight collapse. Some of the worst pain in economic history came from being shackled to gold. So I genuinely don't know which way to feel, and I distrust anyone who's certain. We traded a hard promise we couldn't keep for a soft system we can bend. We gained the power to act. We lost the floor you could knock on. Because that's what really happened on August 15th. It wasn't just that the gold went away, it's what got left standing in its place. If your money is no longer a ticket for metal, no longer backed by any heavy thing in any vault, then it now rests on something else entirely, something thinner, something that had quietly been the real engine all along, hiding behind the gold the whole time. It rests on debt. And to see that, You have to watch what happens the moment a bank says yes to a loan. Let me tell you what you think happens when a bank gives someone a loan. Then let me tell you what actually happens, and watch the gap between them, because that gap is one of the strangest things in the modern world. Here's the story we all carry. The bank is a careful middleman. Savers bring in their money, the bank gathers it into a big pool, and when you come asking for a loan, the bank reaches into that pool of other people's savings and lends some to you. The bank is a bucket. Money flows in from the savers, money flows out to the borrowers, and the bank sits in the middle taking a cut for managing the pipes. Sensible. Reassuring. Almost everyone believes it, including, often, the people who work at banks. It's wrong. And we don't have to argue about it because the people who would know said so themselves, in writing. In 2014, the Bank of England, the central bank of the United Kingdom, one of the oldest and most sober financial institutions on the planet, published a paper in its quarterly bulletin. Three of its economists, Michael McClay, Amar Radia, and Ryland Thomas, wrote it, and they titled it Money Creation in the Modern Economy. It is not a pamphlet by some basement theorist. It is the central bank, on the record, explaining how money is actually made. And what they wrote contradicts the textbook so flatly that I had to read it twice to believe a central bank had said it out loud. They wrote that banks do not lend out deposits that savers place with them. They wrote that banks do not take in existing money and pass it along. Instead, they wrote, whenever a bank makes a loan, it creates a brand new deposit in the borrower's account. The money did not come from a vault or a saver or anywhere. It comes into existence in the instant the loan is signed. Sit with that. You walk into a bank for a mortgage. They approve you for, say, $300,000. They do not go find $300,000 that someone else saved. They type $300,000 into your account, and in the typing, that money is born. It did not exist a second earlier. There was no pile it came out of. The bank wrote a number into a database, and the number became money. Money you'll spend on a real house. Money the seller will treat as completely real because it is. This is the thing people reach for the word conspiracy to describe. And I want to be careful here because it isn't one. A conspiracy is secret. This is published. It's on the Bank of England's own website. Anyone can read it. The strangeness isn't that it's hidden. The strangeness is that it's in plain sight and almost nobody looks. And the few who do are often told they've fallen for something. The truth was sitting on the official record the entire time, wearing a boring title, and that's a better hiding place than any vault. Now your instinct is to recoil and say, then banks can just make infinite money. This is insane. And no, they can't. And this is where I have to be fair to the system instead of just frightening you with it. The same paper is careful to say there are real limits. Banks compete so they can't lend recklessly without bleeding money. They have to manage the risk that loans won't be repaid. And the central bank sets interest rates, which raise or lower the cost of borrowing, and so throttle how much new money the whole system wants to create. The faucet is real, but there's a hand on the tap. It is not infinite. It is just very, very different from the bucket you imagined. But hold on to the deeper thing, because the limits don't dissolve it. Most of the money in your country, the overwhelming majority of what everyone calls money, was not minted by a government or dug from the ground. It was typed into existence by private banks in the act of making loans. Your savings, the seller's house, the wages your employer pays, trace back, most of them, to a moment when somebody borrowed and a bank conjured the sum into being with a keystroke. Which means money isn't a thing the economy has. It's a thing the economy keeps speaking into existence, loan by loan, promise by promise. And now look at what that does to the floor under your feet. We started this whole journey asking where your money is and found no vault. Then we watched the gold promise get canceled in 1971 and found no metal. Now we found the engine, and the engine doesn't run on savings or gold or anything heavy at all. It runs on loans on money created the instant someone agrees to owe, which leads to a sentence that sounds impossible the first time you hear it and is simply mechanically true. Nearly every dollar in existence is a debt. Someone, somewhere, owes it. Your savings are somebody's loan. Pull that thread and the whole thing starts to unravel into something much darker than missing gold. Almost every dollar in existence is owed by someone. Let me show you why that's not a slogan. It's just arithmetic. And then let me show you the trapdoor hidden inside it. Go back to the keystroke. A bank makes a loan, types the sum into the borrower's account, and new money is born. But look at what's actually created in that instant. Two things, not one, and they're mirror images. On one side, the borrower now has money, a positive number, a deposit. On the other side, the borrower now owes that exact amount, a negative number, a debt. The money and the debt are born in the same breath, the same size, pointing opposite directions. They are two faces of a single act. So money, the stuff itself, is not a thing the way a brick is a thing. It's one side of a relationship. Every unit of it is somebody's asset and somebody else's obligation. The same number wearing two coats. When you hold money, you are holding the got paid side of a promise that someone, somewhere, is still on the hook to repay. Here's the metaphor I keep coming back to, and it's not borrowed, it comes straight out of how this actually works. Money is created the way a debt is created at a card table when nobody has cash. Someone writes, "I owe you 100 on a napkin and slides it across, and now there's 100 in play that didn't exist before. And it works. People pass that napkin around and treat it as real, as long as everyone believes the person who signed it will pay. The napkin is money. The economy is a very large table, very good lighting, and almost everything on it is a napkin somebody signed. Now here's the trap door, and it's the part that genuinely unsettles me. If almost all money is created as loans, and loans have to be paid back with interest, then the system owes back more than it ever created. The bank typed your 100,000 into being, but it wants 130 back. Where does the extra 30 come from? It was never created. There's no separate pile of interest money minted somewhere to cover it. The only way the 30 can exist is if someone else, somewhere, takes out another loan, conjuring fresh money into the system. Money that can flow around and become your interest payment, but which itself now owes interest, and so demands yet another loan behind it. So the whole structure has to keep borrowing just to make the math from the last round close. It has to grow, not because growth is wise or wanted, but because if the borrowing ever stops, there isn't enough money in existence to pay back the money in existence. The system is a bicycle. It does not stay up by being well built. It stays up by never stopping. I want to be honest that economists argue about how heavy that problem really is, and I'm not going to pretend it's a tidy proof that everything collapses. Money circulates, interest gets respent. The picture is messier than the clean horror version. But the core stays standing even after you grant all that. This is a system built on debt that depends on the constant creation of new debt that cannot comfortably stand still. We didn't just lose the gold. We built the replacement out of obligation itself and then made it require perpetual motion to survive. And now stack what we found, because the stack is the whole point. Your money is not in a vault. It's a line in a database. That line is not backed by gold. The promise was canceled in 1971. The money in that line was not saved by anyone. It was typed into being by a bank. And it was typed into being as a debt, one half of a promise to repay, in a system that has to keep making new promises or the old ones can't be kept. Look at what's actually holding up the number on your screen. Not metal, not a government vault. A vast, humming web of promises. Billions of them. Strangers owing strangers. Everyone's savings resting on everyone else's debts. The whole thing standing up only because the promises keep getting made and mostly kept. Which raises the question that should be making the hair on your arm stand up by now. If money is just a web of promises, held up by belief that the promises are good, then what actually happens, on the day the belief slips? Not when a government cancels something in a speech, when ordinary people, all at once, quietly stop being sure. We don't have to imagine it. It has happened, in living memory, in cities full of ordinary people exactly like you. And when the belief goes, it doesn't go slowly. It goes in an afternoon. A bank run is the most honest thing that can happen to money because it's the moment everyone tries to check at once, and the system was built on the assumption that they never would. Here's the setup, and it's the same trap we found under the gold standard, just wearing modern clothes. Your bank does not have your money. We've established that, but now feel what it means in a room with a door. The bank took the deposits and lent most of them out, as it's designed to, as it's allowed to. It keeps only a thin sliver of cash on hand because on any normal day, only a few people come to withdraw, and that sliver covers them easily. The bank is solvent. The bank is fine. The bank owes far, far more than it could ever produce on a single afternoon. And that is not a flaw someone snuck in. That's the ordinary, legal, everyday state of every bank you have ever used. It works on one condition, that we don't all show up. Now picture the rumor. It doesn't even have to be true. A whisper goes around that the bank is in trouble, that the money might not be there. And here's the cruel logic that makes a run a run. Even if you personally think the rumor is nonsense, you know the bank can only pay the first people in line. So the rational move, the smart move, is to get to the bank before everyone else who heard the same rumor. You're not panicking, you're being sensible. And so is the person behind you, and the person behind them, and the sensibleness of each individual becomes a stampede that destroys the thing they were all trying to save. This is the nightmare logic of it. A run can be completely rational and completely self-fulfilling at the same time. The fear that the money isn't there is the exact thing that makes the money not be there. A bank that was solvent at breakfast is rubble by dinner. Not because anything real changed, but because belief moved. The whisper became true by being believed. The rumor reached into the vault and emptied it. Sit in what that tells you, because it's the hinge of this entire story. The thing holding your bank up was never mainly the cash in the drawer. It was the shared assumption that you wouldn't all ask. The system doesn't run on having enough. It runs on nobody checking whether there's enough. Confidence isn't a nice-to-have layered on top of a solid thing. Confidence is the solid thing. Pull it out, and there was never anything underneath. We learned this the hard way and built defenses, and I want to be fair about them because they're real and they mostly work. After waves of runs wiped out ordinary families, governments created deposit insurance, a promise that if your bank fails, the state makes you whole up to some limit. And it's clever because notice what it actually does. It doesn't put more cash in the drawer. It changes what you believe. If you're certain you'll get your money back, you don't race to the bank. And if you don't race, the run never starts. Deposit insurance is a machine for manufacturing calm. It defends the system by defending the belief, which is a quiet admission that belief was the foundation all along. So mostly, now, the afternoon doesn't come. The whisper goes around and people shrug because the state has promised, and the promise holds, and the line never forms. We patched the trapdoor. I'm genuinely glad we did. Families used to lose everything to a rumor. But look at what the patch is made of. It's another promise. We answered, what if people stop believing the bank with, the government believes for them? We stacked a bigger faith on top of the smaller one. And that works beautifully right up until the day the bigger faith is the one that slips, until the doubt climbs past the individual bank and reaches the currency itself, the money, the whole idea that these numbers mean anything. Because deposit insurance can promise to give you back every last unit of your money, it cannot promise those units will still be worth anything when you get them. And that is a different kind of collapse. Not one bank's drawer running empty. The belief draining out of the money itself, everywhere, all at once, so that the numbers stay in your account, every digit exactly where you left it, and they simply stop meaning a loaf of bread. That has happened too, to a nation of educated, modern, careful people who thought it never could. And the photographs they left behind are some of the strangest images of the 20th century. Children building with bricks of cash. A woman feeding a stove with banknotes because the paper was cheaper than firewood. Let me take you to Germany, 1923. In the autumn of 1923, in Germany, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. By the time you've absorbed that sentence, in that city, it likely cost more. I want to walk you into this slowly because the numbers are so large, they stop meaning anything, and the whole horror is in making them mean something again. So let's not start at the peak. Let's start where it started, which looked almost ordinary. Before the First World War, the German mark was a hard, respectable currency, about 4 of them to the dollar, roughly level with the British shilling and the French franc. Solid money in a solid country. A nation of engineers and professors and careful savers, people who did everything right, who put money aside the way you're supposed to. Hold those people in your mind. They are the point of this chapter. They were not foolish. They were not a failed state. They were the most educated society in Europe, and they are about to watch their money die. And most of them won't understand what's killing it until it's gone. The best account we have is a book by the British historian Adam Ferguson called When Money Dies, published in 1975, and it traces the descent month by month, the way you'd track a patient getting sicker. The government, crushed by war debt and reparations, did the thing governments can now do since gold stopped holding their hand. It printed. To cover what it owed, it made more marks, and then more, and each new wave of marks made every existing mark worth a little less, which meant it needed to print even more to cover the same costs, which made the marks worth less again. The faucet we talked about, with no hand on the tap. Once it spun up, it fed itself. Now watch the speed, because the speed is the terror. Ferguson records that in the middle of 1922, a loaf of bread cost around 400 marks. A year and a half later, it was in the hundreds of billions. He gives an image I have not been able to put down since I read it. By November 1923, a sum that before the war could have bought 500 billion eggs would buy, that month, exactly one egg, the same money. That is not a number anymore. That is a whole world of savings, of pensions, of careful planning, collapsing into a single egg in a market stall. And here is what I need you to actually picture, because this is where it stops being economics and becomes people. The money in their accounts didn't vanish. That's the part that breaks my brain. The digits stayed. A man who'd saved his whole life still had his number, still had what was once a fortune written next to his name, and it would no longer buy him dinner. Workers were paid twice a day and ran on their lunch break to spend it before the afternoon made it worthless, because waiting until evening meant losing half of it. Wives waited at the factory gates to grab the wages and rush to the shops while the money still meant something. People burned banknotes in their stoves because the paper gave more warmth as fuel than the marks could buy in coal. Children stacked bricks of cash on the floor like toy blocks, because that's what it was now, paper to play with. By December, the exchange rate was $1 to 4.2 trillion marks. The mark had become 1/millionth of a millionth of what it was a decade before. Money didn't lose value. Money died, exactly as the title says, and the people holding it could only watch. Now, I'll be careful because the easy lesson here is a scare story, and you can find 1,000 of them telling you your money is about to do the same tomorrow. It probably isn't. Weimar was a specific catastrophe with specific causes: a lost war, crippling reparations, a young and fragile government. This is not a prediction. I'm not selling you gold or panic. Ferguson himself notes how unrepeatable the exact conditions were. But strip away the specifics and look at what's left. Because what's left is the thing that should keep you up. Nothing physical changed in Germany over those months. The fields were the same fields. The factories, the workers, the bread itself, all still there, still real. The only thing that collapsed was a belief. The shared agreement that a mark was worth something. That agreement evaporated, and when it did, the careful savers discovered the truth we've been circling this whole time. There was never anything under their money but other people's confidence in it. And confidence is not a floor, it's weather. The Germans found out what their money really was the moment it stopped working, which means the rest of us, whose money still works, have simply never been forced to find out. So what is it, this thing we've all agreed to believe in? Not metal, not the state, not debt even. Something older and stranger than all of them. So here's where we've arrived. Money isn't metal, it isn't a vault, isn't a government, isn't even really debt at the bottom, because debt is just a promise, and a promise is only as real as the belief behind it. Strip everything away, and what's actually holding up the number on your screen is this. A story that everyone, all at once, has agreed to treat as true. That's not me being poetic. That's the most sober way to say it. And the person who said it most clearly is the historian Yuval Noah Harari in his book *Sapiens*. He calls money the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. And then he says the thing that reorganizes how you see your whole life. A dollar has value only in our common imagination, not in the paper, not in the metal, in the shared belief, and nowhere else. Harari's bigger idea is that humans rule this planet because we can do something no other animal can. We can believe in things that don't physically exist, together, and then cooperate around them as if they're real. Gods, nations, laws, corporations, none of these are things you can stub your toe on. They live in the space between minds. He has a word for that kind of thing, intersubjective. Not objective, true whether you believe it or not, like gravity. Not subjective, true just for you, like a private dream. Intersubjective, real because we all believe it at once, and real for exactly as long as we keep believing, and not 1 second longer. Money is the purest intersubjective thing we've ever made. A god you can spend. A shared story so useful, so woven into every hour of your day, that we stop being able to see it as a story at all. And now look back at everything we walk through, because it all resolves into this one shape. The gold in 1971 wasn't the foundation, it was a prop, a physical crutch we used to help ourselves believe. And once the belief was strong enough to stand on its own, we kicked the crutch away and barely wobbled. The bank typing money into existence isn't a glitch. It's a society agreeing to count a new promise as real. The bank run isn't an aberration. It's the rare, terrible moment the shared belief flickers, and you see, for one afternoon, that there was only ever belief down there. And Weimar isn't a freak event. Weimar is what an intersubjective reality looks like the instant the inter falls out. The moment we stop believing together. This is the floor we lost in Chapter 1. And it turns out it was never a floor. It was a held breath. Billions of people every day quietly agreeing not to exhale. And here's the part that I find genuinely beautiful and genuinely terrifying in the same thought. And I don't want to resolve the contradiction because the contradiction is the truth. This shared fiction is not a trick played on you. You are not the victim of it. You are a co-author of it. Every time you accept payment without flinching, every time you swipe a card and trust the number will mean something, every time you don't run to the bank, you are casting a vote. You are one of the billions holding the story up. The belief isn't happening to you. The belief is partly you. Money is real because you, personally, keep agreeing it is, along with everyone you've ever met and billions you never will. Which means the system isn't held up by bankers or governments or men in a room at Camp David. They tend it, they steer it, but they don't hold it up. You do. We do. The whole towering structure rests on a foundation made of nothing but our collective, daily, unspoken agreement not to ask the one question we started with. Where is the money, really? We agreed not to ask. Not in a meeting, not in a contract. We agreed the way a crowd agrees which way to walk. Without a word, each of us following the others, following us. Everyone agreed to pretend, and the pretending is so total, so seamless, so backed by everyone else's pretending, that it stopped feeling like pretending and started feeling like the ground. And mostly, that's fine. I want to say that clearly because the point here isn't to terrify you into burying gold in your yard. A shared fiction that lets millions of strangers cooperate, trade, build, feed each other is one of the most extraordinary things our species ever did. The fiction works. It is, in its way, a kind of miracle. But a miracle that depends on no one looking too hard is a strange thing to build a life on. And you've now looked. So the last question isn't about money anymore. It's about you, standing here, holding this, knowing what you know. What do you do with a floor once you've seen it's made of breath? Open your banking app one more time. The same number is still there. Nothing changed while we talked. The digits sit exactly where they sat an hour ago, next to your name, patient, certain looking. But you're not looking at the same thing anymore because you know now what you're looking at, and it can't be unknown. You're looking at a promise. One held breath in a room of 8 billion people, all holding theirs. A story so good we forgot it was a story. I told you at the start I felt a little sick when I first understood this, and I want to tell you where that settled because it didn't stay sick. It turned into something quieter and harder to name. Because here's what's strange. Knowing all this changes nothing about your Tuesday. You'll still go to work. The number still buys bread, still pays rent, still stands between you and the cold. The fiction didn't get weaker because you saw it. If anything, you can feel how strong it is now, strong enough to survive you knowing. That's the part that stays with me. I can see straight through it, and it still holds my whole life up. And it holds yours. And it doesn't need either of us to believe in it sincerely. It only needs us to keep acting as if. And we will. Tomorrow morning, all 8 billion of us will wake up and agree again, without a word, the way we did yesterday and the day before. Back and back through every market and every coin to the first person who ever traded a thing they didn't need for a token they couldn't eat, trusting that someone else would take it later. That trust is the oldest technology we have. Older than the wheel, maybe. We just keep choosing it every single day, mostly without noticing we're choosing. I don't have a lesson to hand you. No move to make, nothing to buy or sell, no vault to go fill. That's not what this was. This was just one question, the simple one, the one almost no one asks. Where is the money, really? You know the answer now. It isn't in a vault. It isn't in gold. It isn't in the bank. It isn't even really in the number. It's in the agreement. It's in the space between all of us. It's in the fact that tomorrow you'll believe again, and so will I, and so will everyone. And that shared believing is the only place the money has ever lived. Go look at the number one more time. Then ask yourself what else in your life is held up the exact same way, by nothing but everyone agreeing not to ask. And notice how quietly you decide not to.